Hello, my name is Kelly Kelly. Welcome to the NICU Now audio support series. I am a NICU parent to Jackson, a micro-preemie born at 24 weeks, and Lauren, a late-term preemie born at 34 weeks. I am also the founder and executive director of Hand to Hold, a national nonprofit dedicated to providing education, resources, and peer-to-peer support to families that have experienced premature birth, the loss of a baby, or have a child with a special healthcare need. Joining me today is Kara Walhin. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist and founder of NICUhealing.com. And she's also the mother of preemie twins born at 26 weeks. And unfortunately, a bereaved mother of one of her babies passed away shortly after being born in the NICU. Kara, we are so excited to have you here today. Can you tell us a little bit about how you decided to become a family therapist? Did this result from your NICU experience?
So actually, I've been in the field of marriage and family therapy since I was in my early 20s. I was drawn to it based on the ideas of social justice and community empowerment just because I felt really drawn to that, and I wanted to work with people that had been marginalized by mainstream culture. So primarily throughout my career, I worked in residential treatment facilities. I've worked with teen moms. I've worked with women coming out of the prison system that were being reunited with their kids. More recently, and prior to the preterm birth of my sons, I worked with transition-aged youth at a group home who were trying to get independent so that they could support themselves and move on with their lives. In going through the NICU experience, however, I realized very quickly that there were very few support services for parents who were going through things that were similar to what I was facing at that time. And I felt like that was a huge lapse because it has a lot to do with your ability to attach with your child and your ability to be able to bond with them, which then in turn affects their development in the long run. So in going through the NICU experience myself, I realized that there was a huge lack of services for parents going through the very same thing. To me, I felt like it was critical that parents got social support and therapeutic services when going through this experience, just because it also affects their ability to attach with their infants and in turn, the development of their infants and what outcomes could look like in the future. So as a result, I started to develop my website, NICU Healing, almost immediately after Elliot's discharge from the hospital, because it was also a little bit of a part of my own healing. In going through the NICU journey, I knew that it was something that I would never be able to truly leave behind me. So I wanted to figure out what will I do in taking it with me and what will that look like. And what made me feel passionate is that NICU parents really didn't have a lot of people to be able to speak to about it. And I thought, well, let me be one of those people and do the best that I can.
You and I have kind of joked about this in the past that, we wish that there was at least 1 to 2 years of free counseling for every NICU parent, because I think it's just so invaluable. And no one talked to me about maybe needing therapy or even peer-to-peer support. Mm-hmm. I really think that all of my emotional and mental health issues were completely ignored.
Sure. And then the other thing that moms have to cope with is stigma. I even knew moms that have gone through a traumatic birth experience that didn't necessarily experience the NICU that are struggling. They're told by our culture that there's something wrong with them if it's not this blissful experience that motherhood, the light shines down from the sky and all of a sudden they're bonded with their baby and there's singing and everything is all like, oh, beautiful and amazing. Motherhood is really, really challenging. And when you've gone through a trauma like the NICU, it brings it to a whole other level of challenge. And so it's really important to be able to find the support that you need in being able to move forward and become the parent that you want to be, as opposed to being taken away by some of the mental health issues that can come up with it. Now, I'm not a huge fan even of diagnosis at all, but when you find that your mental health symptoms are taking you away from being the parent that you want to be, or taking you away from what your intentions are in being a parent, then that's something that I'm willing to help people take a stand against, because I believe that everybody should be able to be the type of parent that they want to be. And with NICU parents, that struggle that they go through with the NICU, it shows how much energy they are willing to put into parenting and how much love they truly have for their infant. And that's something that I find is an honor to be able to witness.
That was something that I was very drawn
Yeah.
to you specifically when I first heard you speak, and then after participating in some of your webinars, because, I want a definition. I want to know, okay, is this postpartum depression? Is this anxiety disorder? Is this PTSD? Is it what is trauma?
Sure.
And hearing you kind of talk about, you know, I can't remember your exact words. Maybe you can help me remember how you phrased it. But you basically said it doesn't matter. I mean, it does as far as
Sure.
like
And we
ongoing
can talk
treatment.
about when it gets to a different level.
But at the beginning, like just acknowledging that something's not right and that you need help and you need support is very valuable, and then you go from there. But that just trying to label everything is sometimes difficult in the beginning.
Yeah, sometimes it can be empowering to feel like you're a part of a group and to know that you're not alone. So diagnoses can work in a really positive way in the sense that you don't feel like you're the only person that's experiencing whatever mental health symptoms you might be experiencing. But to me, it's sort of, I've said it before and I say it again, it's dealing with, in the ways that you can, with extraordinary circumstances and dealing with chronic stress, like what the NICU brings, regardless of how strong you are mentally, you're going to have different ways of coping with it, and there's going to be challenges that come up with it because, quite frankly, it's an experience that nobody would wish on their worst enemy. It's an experience that hopefully, when people don't have it, it's just sort of realize how wonderful it is that you haven't gone through
Well, that's
this.
so true because one of the challenges is that our friends don't typically know how to support us. I had amazing friends, amazing community and church and work staff members. Everyone wanted to reach out and help me, but I found that they didn't really understand what we were going through. I think a lot of people think of premature birth as just a really small baby, and didn't really understand how critical. And even as he got bigger, just assuming that everything was fine when he reached a certain weight, right, or that he came home. And some of the things that were said to me out of love and out of a desire to support me were some of the most hurtful things. And in a lot of the reading I've done and getting to know lots of other NICU parents, I know that we've been hurt deeply by friends who, one, just can't deal with our trauma, and so they isolate themselves from us and they are not there for us. Then others that, again, say things that they mean out of love but can be very hurtful. I remember some friend telling me, "Oh, well, you'll be well rested when he comes home." And I'm thinking, well rested? I mean, I'm still pumping every 2 to 3 hours. I'm, getting up every 2 to 3 hours during the night to pump. I'm driving back and forth to the NICU. I'm exhausted. And so I think, they were trying to find a positive thing to say about a NICU experience.
Yes.
But I found it... I found it just very disheartening that they didn't really understand what I was going through.
Sure, absolutely. And I think what you're speaking to is very common. And I like that you gave, it's not that people don't have empathy for us or that they don't care. It's that sometimes they can't fathom what the experience is, and they're grasping for that silver lining, for that idea that there can be something positive that you can take away from a truly horrific experience. And another thing that you spoke to, that idea where you're just sort of left set apart from the community that you were once a part of. Bessel van der Kolk, he's one of the most well-renowned authors about trauma currently out there. And he had this wonderful point in one of his books that he was talking about how the way that our brains deal with trauma, which is kind of by compartmentalizing it and keeping it separate from our dominant part, it works the same way in society. Society is sort of afraid to look at the things that scare us. And so by virtue of trying to maintain almost that safe distance, and not intentionally, not even consciously, a lot of the times people that are going through truly tough times, they're not able to speak to that in an environment with others that aren't, or that don't understand maybe what that might be like, or that are afraid to even know about it. It can be horrifying just witnessing the experience for people that don't know what it's like. So it compounds that feeling of guilt, shame, isolation, and oftentimes depression that comes with being a NICU parent, because you're cut off from the normal support systems or the typical support systems that you've been able to garnish in the rest of your life. All of a sudden, when you need it the most, it all falls away. And again, that's one of the reasons that I like to do what I do, is that no one should ever have to find themselves waking up in a situation that their world is falling apart and they're all by themselves and they're having to figure out how to go from there all alone.
Yeah, I want to revisit something for just a second that you said earlier about if you've had previous trauma or previous loss. Is that the same for NICU parents? I know in some of the studies I've read, they've talked about parents being predisposed to having acute anxiety or PTSD. So I'm just wondering kind of if we've had a past trauma, how that might play into what we're experiencing now in this traumatic birth situation.
Sure. So the way that trauma works is it changes our brain, basically. To give you an example, I have an early childhood experience of when I was learning how to swim. And I grew up in the desert, in the Palm Springs, Palm Desert area. And I was at the YMCA learning, in the swimming lesson, I couldn't have been much older than 2 years old. And when I got to the side and I was going to pull myself out of the pool, I grabbed the railing, and it was red hot because it was probably 110 degrees that day. I burned my hand and fell backwards, and I went under the water. And now that's currently my earliest childhood memory, because the way that our brains work is you go through something, even something that simple, and it just hardwires in your brain. Boom, hot, danger, death. So preventing something awful from happening. So to give context to the studies that come out that talk about how someone that's been through a history of trauma or that has a prior diagnosis of anxiety or PTSD makes them more likely to develop symptoms after the NICU, what you can basically look to is the idea that trauma changes our brain so that we can be more apt towards survival. And so how that works is that we're more likely to pay attention to things that are threatening. And that can go, of course, everything is always on a spectrum. That can go from being slightly more wary to being, to the
hypervigilant.
Exactly, when you get to the PTSD symptoms where it's something that it's preventing you from being able to enjoy your day-to-day life. And so the more that you move towards that hypervigilance or towards that more extreme version of those symptoms of being aware of what's around you, being prepared for any kind of threat, being more in tune to threats than you are to spontaneous life, then the more apt that you are when you go through something else that forces you into that fight or flight survival mode. Even when it's the fact that you're watching your baby on life support, it's not necessarily you going through the exact circumstance, it's your baby. You already have sort of some of that wiring is set up for you to have that PTSD or, very traumatically influenced response to what's happening in front of you. But there's a lot of really incredible research out there about how profoundly trauma affects our brains. And even when it does occur later in life, it's amazing. And so having an understanding of that can be really empowering in terms of figuring out what you want to do with that after going through an experience that can be so threatening and so scary. So it's definitely something that is important to be aware of and can be helpful to be aware of, because then it gives you a little sense of what is typical, what is a normal response, and what are some of the things that you should look out for moving forward, in that you're not being held back from living the life that you want to because you're constantly prepared for the worst case scenario.
And really unable to care for our baby.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think it really can impact your parenting and your marriage. For those of us who had to continue to work, I definitely think it can take a toll on you in being able to function at work and just in the normal day-to-day activities. So thank you so much for helping us better understand the impact of trauma.
Thank you so much, Kelly. It's great being here.